The desert stretched in every direction, a sea of golden sand under the wide blue sky. The wind carried grains that whispered against stones and tents. For many years people had searched this desert for traces of the past. Some found broken pottery, others discovered old tools, but nothing had prepared them for what was about to be revealed. Aaron stood near a ridge where the sand sloped down. His boots sank with every step, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. He was not the oldest or the most experienced in the team, yet he was the one who felt the strongest pull toward the unknown. Since childhood, he had dreamed of uncovering secrets buried beneath the earth. That morning, when the sun rose red and bright, he sensed the day would bring something unforgettable. The research team had been working for weeks. They dug carefully, mapped each corner, and brushed away dust from stones that seemed older than memory itself. At first, the stones looked like natural blocks, but soon patterns began to appear. Straight lines. Angles that matched perfectly. The signs of a structure hidden beneath layers of sand. By midday, the team uncovered a massive stone entrance. Its surface was covered with strange carvings. Unlike ordinary symbols, these seemed to shift slightly under the light, as if they were alive. Aaron bent closer and touched the lines. The stone was cool, yet the marks gave off a faint glow. "Look at this," Aaron said, calling the others. The team gathered. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered about forgotten languages or lost kingdoms. No one could explain why the carvings seemed to shine. They decided to take detailed notes, but in Aaron's heart, he knew they were standing before something far greater than they could measure with rulers or notebooks. With careful effort, they cleared the sand from the base of the doorway. It took hours, but at last the way opened wide enough for them to step inside. A cool draft brushed against their faces, carrying the scent of earth and something older, something untouched for ages. The air inside was heavy yet strangely pure, as though sealed away from time itself. Aaron lit a lantern and stepped forward. The flame flickered but held strong. The walls inside were tall, meeting at a sharp point above their heads. The stone blocks were smooth, fitted so perfectly that no space remained between them. The group moved slowly, their footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. They followed a narrow passage that twisted downward. The deeper they went, the stronger their sense of wonder grew. Shadows stretched across carvings that looked like stars, rivers, and creatures unknown. Every wall told a story, though none of them yet understood the meaning. Finally, the passage widened into a vast chamber. Aaron raised his lantern high. The sight before them froze everyone in place. The chamber was filled with skeletons. Not scattered or broken, but arranged in a wide circle. Each skeleton sat upright, resting against the wall or against one another, as if they had gathered for a meeting long ago and never left. The bones were pale and clean, untouched by decay. Some still held objects shaped like smooth stones in their bony fingers. The silence was overwhelming. The flame from the lantern trembled, and shadows danced over the circle of figures. The team exchanged uneasy looks. One whispered that it looked like a council frozen in time. Another said it might have been a ritual. But no one dared move closer at first. Aaron's heart raced, not with fear, but with awe. He stepped forward carefully, kneeling before the nearest skeleton. Its skull was smooth, its eye sockets large. It did not look quite human. He noticed patterns on the bones, faint lines that reminded him of the glowing carvings outside. "This is not ordinary," Aaron said softly. His words echoed in the chamber, carried across the circle of silent figures. The others began to examine the skeletons more closely. They noticed that none of them had fallen apart. They sat as if waiting, patient and still. The objects in their hands reflected the lantern light with a soft glow, much like the carvings on the doorway. Aaron raised his head and looked around the chamber. The walls here were different. They did not just hold carvings but entire scenes etched into the stone. There were shapes of pyramids, stars above them, and beams of light reaching down from the sky. It was as if the chamber itself was a book, recording stories too old to be remembered. The team stood in silence for a long time. Each person felt the same unspoken truth. They had discovered something far beyond treasure or artifacts. They had stepped into a secret kept hidden for countless years. Aaron held the lantern higher, and the glow spread across the chamber, touching each silent figure. A strange thought entered his mind. These skeletons were not resting. They were waiting. And he knew, deep inside, that the story of this chamber had only just begun. The chamber remained silent, but it did not feel empty. Every skeleton seemed to watch the visitors, their hollow eyes fixed in quiet patience. The glow from the lantern brushed against their pale forms and cast long shadows on the floor. Aaron stood at the center, his heart heavy with questions. He noticed something unusual. The skeletons were not placed without thought. They formed a perfect circle, each one seated at the same distance from the next. Their arms rested on their knees or on the smooth objects they still held. It was not the look of a battlefield or a burial ground. It was the look of a gathering, as if they had chosen to sit here together. "Look at the order," Aaron whispered. This was not chance. They arranged themselves. The team spread out slowly, careful not to disturb the resting figures. One member knelt to measure the spacing. The distance between each skeleton was exactly the same. Another counted the number of seats in the circle. It was 36, not one more, not one less. Aaron walked around the chamber, studying each figure closely. Some had longer limbs, others shorter, but all carried the same strange shape in their skulls. Their foreheads rose higher, and their jaws were smoother than human bones. He tried to imagine them as living beings, speaking, moving, perhaps teaching. The thought sent a shiver through him. His attention then fell to the objects clutched in their hands. At first, he had thought they were stones, but now he saw they were shaped too perfectly to be natural. Each object was round and smooth, polished like glass, yet faintly glowing from within. When the lantern light touched them, the glow grew brighter, as though they were answering. Aaron bent closer to one skeleton and gently held the object in his palm. It was cool, heavier than he expected, and it pulsed with a faint light. He felt no harm, only a strange calmness, like a quiet voice inside his mind telling him to look closer. The others gasped when they saw the glow in Aaron's hand. Some stepped back, while others leaned in with curiosity. "It reacts to him," one whispered. Aaron placed the object back in the skeleton's hand with respect. The glow dimmed, but his heart continued to race. On the walls, the carvings caught his attention again. They did not look like ordinary decorations. Each wall carried a sequence, almost like a story written in pictures. The first wall showed groups of tall figures standing beneath the stars. The second wall showed pyramids rising from the sand, while the tall figures stood beside smaller humans. The third wall showed circles of light in the sky, descending toward the earth. The meaning was not yet clear, but Aaron felt the story was about connection, not destruction. The team gathered near him. One of them said, "What if this chamber is not a tomb at all? What if it is a record, a memory of who they were and what they came to do?" Aaron nodded. "It feels like they were not trapped here. They chose this place. Maybe this chamber is their message to us. His words filled the silence, and for a moment, the team forgot their unease. They began sketching the walls, tracing the symbols, and writing down their findings. As they worked, something strange happened. The light of the lantern flickered against the carvings, and the figures on the wall seemed to shift. Lines that had once been still now glowed faintly, forming patterns like stars. The team gasped in wonder. Aaron stepped closer. The glowing points connected into shapes that looked like constellations. He recognized one pattern that matched the northern sky. Another showed a cluster of stars too far to see with the naked eye. "It is a map," Aaron whispered. The others leaned closer. The glowing map stretched across the wall, moving from one side to the other. Some of the points pulsed brighter than the rest, as if marking a path. Aaron traced the glowing line with his finger, his mind filled with awe. The skeletons seemed to be sitting in the circle beneath this very map, as though they had gathered here to follow the path together. The more he looked, the more certain he became. These were not the remains of ordinary travelers. They had come from beyond the stars. The chamber grew warmer, or perhaps it was only Aaron's imagination. His heart beat faster, and he felt that he stood at the edge of something greater than discovery. He was not just looking at bones and stones. He was looking at a story of friendship, of beings who had crossed the endless sky to meet others. One of the team members asked softly, "Why did they stay? Why did they not return?" No one had an answer. Aaron turned to the circle again. The skeletons sat as if frozen in time, their hands holding the glowing objects, their eyes fixed on eternity. He wondered if they had chosen to remain, leaving behind a silent message for the future. As the lantern flame steadied, the glow on the wall slowly faded. The chamber returned to stillness, but the team could no longer see it the same way. To them, this was no longer a room of bones. It was a hall of memory. And Aaron felt certain that the chamber had more to reveal. The chamber seemed quiet again, yet the memory of the glowing map lingered in everyone's minds. Aaron stood before the wall, running his fingers lightly across the carvings. The surface felt like ordinary stone, but he knew it was not. When the lantern flame shifted earlier, the wall had responded. That meant it was more than just carved rock. It was built to speak, though in a language different from words. The others gathered close, each person holding a notebook or a camera. They wanted to capture every detail before the light faded for good. But Aaron kept staring at one part of the wall, a section where the carvings seemed deeper, as if the makers wanted it to stand out. He placed his hand flat against the stone. At first nothing happened. Then, slowly, a ripple spread across the wall, like water stirred by a pebble. The glowing points returned, brighter than before, and lines stretched outward, forming shapes that moved as though alive. The team gasped, stepping back in awe. The chamber no longer looked silent and still. It was alive with shifting light. Stars danced across the stone, forming paths, circles, and streams of light that flowed from one end of the wall to the other. Aaron whispered, "It is showing us something. It is telling a story." The patterns changed. At first, they showed the star map again, but then new shapes appeared. Small figures stood beneath the sky, their arms raised. Above them, larger figures descended in beams of light. The two groups faced each other, not in conflict but in greeting. The message was clear even without words. It showed a meeting. The team stood in silence, watching. One of them whispered, "They came here. They met with humans." Aaron nodded slowly. The tall figures in the glowing story looked very much like the skeletons seated in the circle. The smaller ones resembled human shapes, shorter but similar in form. The walls were telling the history of an ancient encounter. The images shifted again. Now the tall figures were shown teaching the smaller ones. They held tools, drew lines in the sand, and pointed to the stars. The smaller figures copied them, learning quickly. Then the walls displayed great stone blocks being moved into place, as if teaching how to build structures that could last forever. The team whispered among themselves, writing notes as fast as they could. Each new image seemed to confirm what Aaron already believed. These visitors had not come to harm. They had come to share knowledge. Suddenly, the glowing story paused. A single line of symbols appeared across the wall, brighter than the rest. None of them could read the symbols, but the meaning felt strong, almost as if the mind could sense it without knowing the language. Aaron felt a strange warmth in his chest. He whispered, "This is not about death. This is about memory." The wall shifted again. Now the tall figures were shown sitting in circles, holding the same glowing objects that the skeletons still held in their hands. Lines of light connected the objects, forming a network like a web of stars. It looked like a meeting of minds, a way to share thoughts without speech. The others leaned closer. One said softly, "Could it be their way of keeping records? Or speaking to one another?" Aaron thought of the moment earlier when he had touched one of the glowing objects. He remembered the calmness, the quiet sense of being understood. Perhaps these objects were more than tools. Perhaps they carried voices, memories, or even pieces of thought. He looked back at the circle of skeletons. Each one sat with the object in its hand, as though they had once been part of this great network. Perhaps the chamber itself had once been alive with their voices, their ideas, their stories. The team could hardly breathe as the glowing story reached its final part. The tall figures were shown again, standing under the stars. This time, the beams of light that had once brought them down now lifted upward. Some figures rose into the sky, but a smaller group stayed behind. The images faded slowly, leaving only the map of stars shining on the wall. The chamber grew still again. The lantern flame was the only movement now. Aaron let out a long breath. He felt both wonder and sadness. The story told of visitors who had come from far away, who had met with humans, shared their knowledge, and then departed. But some had remained. The skeletons sitting in the circle were likely those who had chosen to stay. The others turned to him, waiting for him to speak. Aaron said quietly, "This is more than history. This is a message. They wanted us to find this, to remember them." The group nodded in agreement. They all felt the weight of the moment. This chamber was not simply a place of the past. It was a bridge between worlds, a reminder that humanity's story was connected to something greater. The silence deepened, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning, as if the voices of the past still lingered, waiting for someone to listen. And Aaron knew they had only uncovered the beginning. The chamber remained dim, yet the story on the walls had changed how the team looked at everything. They no longer saw only bones and carvings. They saw a place where voices of the past were still waiting to be heard. Aaron could not stop thinking about the objects in the skeleton's hands. The glowing orbs felt too important to ignore. He approached one again, this time with more courage. The object rested in the bony fingers of a figure seated near the far wall. With steady hands, he lifted it once more. The orb pulsed faintly as if recognizing his touch. It grew warmer in his palm and gave off a soft light. Aaron held it up so the others could see. The glow reflected in their eyes, filling the chamber with a gentle silver shine. Before anyone could speak, the orb released a sudden shimmer of light into the air above. The glow shaped itself into an image, hanging like mist. The team gasped. Floating in front of them was a picture of a tall structure, shining under the stars. It looked like a pyramid, but larger and brighter than any pyramid they had seen before. Around it, strange ships hovered, their forms smooth and curved. The image changed, showing rivers, forests, and mountains as if the world itself was being painted in light. Aaron felt his breath catch. These were not simple pictures. They were records, memories stored within the orb. The team stepped closer, their eyes wide. The image shifted again. Now it showed small groups of humans standing beside the tall visitors. They exchanged items, smiled, and sat together around fires. The humans offered tools and food, while the visitors offered glowing objects and scrolls filled with symbols. The chamber filled with quiet wonder. Each person felt they were watching a moment from the distant past. The orb dimmed slightly, and the images vanished. Aaron held it tightly, afraid the vision might disappear forever. But when he moved it again, another stream of light appeared. This time the picture showed the earth from high above, round and blue, with white clouds swirling across its surface. The team gasped louder than before. They were seeing the world from the sky. The skeletons in the circle seemed to glow faintly in the orb's light, as if sharing their story once more. Aaron placed the orb gently back into the skeleton's hand, and the glow softened. Another member of the team dared to lift a second orb. At first, nothing happened, but then this one too came alive with pictures. A wide hall appeared, filled with tall figures standing around a crystal that glowed like fire. They placed their hands on the crystal, and beams of light rose into the ceiling. It looked like a place of gathering, a hall of knowledge where ideas were shared without words. Aaron whispered, "This must be how they spoke to each other. Not with sound, but with thought and memory." The others nodded, too stunned to speak clearly. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of discovery pressed on their hearts. This chamber was not built for mourning. It was built for remembering. The orbs carried messages, stories, and visions that stretched across time. Aaron began to pace slowly, looking at the circle again. He realized that each skeleton held an orb. If each orb contained memories, then the entire circle was like a library, each figure a keeper of knowledge. He imagined them sitting together long ago, their orbs glowing, their minds linked. Perhaps this was how they taught humans to farm, to build, to measure the stars. Perhaps the very roots of human learning had grown from the seeds planted in this circle. Aaron turned to the walls again. The carvings of pyramids and stars no longer seemed mysterious. They were instructions, guides left behind so the chamber would not lose its purpose. One of the team members spoke at last. "We must be careful. The world has never seen anything like this. Some may not believe. Others may try to claim it for themselves." Aaron agreed, but in his heart he also knew the truth could not be hidden forever. This chamber belonged not to one person, nor one team, but to all people. The story was not about treasure. It was about connection. He looked once more at the skeletons, each seated in quiet dignity. Their faces were gone, but their story remained. Through the orbs, through the walls, through the chamber itself, they still spoke. The team sat in silence, each lost in thought. The lantern light flickered gently, and the orbs shimmered faintly in answer. Aaron whispered, "They wanted to be remembered. And now they are." But even as the chamber grew calm again, Aaron felt there was more waiting to be uncovered. The orbs had given them visions, but something deeper still called from beneath the stone floor. The chamber was not finished with them yet. The silence in the great hall lingered long after the glowing orbs dimmed. The team stood together, their faces lit by the soft lantern flame. Each one felt the weight of what they had seen. The circle of skeletons and the strange devices in their hands told a story greater than any written in books. Yet Aaron sensed the chamber still held secrets waiting to be found. He knelt at the center of the circle, brushing dust from the floor. At first it seemed plain stone, but when the lantern's light shifted, faint lines appeared. They formed a pattern, almost like a doorway carved into the floor itself. "Here," Aaron whispered. "Something lies beneath." The others gathered quickly, their eyes wide with curiosity. They ran their fingers over the lines, confirming it was not a crack or accident of time. It was shaped with purpose. The group cleared more sand and brushed the stone until the pattern shone clearly. At the center was a square block slightly lower than the rest. With careful effort, they pressed against the block. At first it did not move. Then, with a deep echo, the stone shifted downward and slid aside. A dark opening appeared, leading into a narrow passage below. The team hesitated. The air rising from the passage was cooler, yet not stale. It carried a faint hum, as though something deep inside was alive. Aaron lit a second lantern and held it high. "We must go," he said. "This place is guiding us." They climbed down carefully, one by one, until they reached a lower chamber. Unlike the great hall above, this room was small and round. The walls were smooth, with fewer carvings, but at the center stood a single crystal. The crystal was tall, reaching up to Aaron's shoulder. Its surface glowed faintly with shifting colors, blue and silver mixing together like flowing water. The hum grew louder the closer they stepped. It was not noise but a gentle vibration, as if the chamber itself was breathing. The team stood in silence, awed by the sight. The crystal pulsed slowly, and the floor beneath their feet trembled with each wave of light. Aaron approached, his heart pounding. He raised his hand and touched the crystal. It was warm, unlike the cold stone of the walls. The moment his skin made contact, light spread outward across the chamber. The walls came alive with visions. Images formed around them, clear and bright like windows into another world. They saw fields of green under twin suns, mountains of silver stone, and rivers glowing with light. Tall figures, the same as the skeletons above, moved across the landscapes, building towers and shaping vast cities. The team gasped. They were not looking at carvings or symbols. They were looking at living memory. The images changed. The tall figures were shown meeting humans again, this time teaching them to plant seeds in the soil and raise animals for food. They showed how to watch the stars, how to measure seasons, how to build homes of strength. Humans listened, learned, and grew. Aaron's eyes filled with wonder. He saw families planting crops, guided by the visitors. He saw pyramids rising stone by stone, while the tall figures stood beside humans, sharing their tools and knowledge. For the first time, Aaron felt he understood why the pyramid chamber had been built. It was not only a record. It was a gift. The visitors wanted their story to remain, so humans would never forget where some of their wisdom came from. The vision shifted once more. The tall figures gathered around a crystal much like the one standing before the team. They placed their hands upon it, and the light spread far into the sky. The stars above them shimmered, forming paths of travel. The visitors looked upward as though speaking to their own kind far away. Then the vision dimmed. The visitors grew weaker. Some lay down while others watched with heavy eyes. A few stayed behind, seated with their glowing orbs in circles, as if to guard the memory for the future. The last image showed the crystal glowing alone in the darkness, waiting. The light faded. The chamber returned to stillness, leaving only the faint hum of the crystal. No one spoke for a long time. Each person felt the same deep respect for what they had seen. These visitors had not ruled or conquered. They had taught, guided, and then remained until their time ended. Aaron placed his hand again on the crystal. He felt not sadness but a sense of trust. It was as though the crystal had been waiting for humans to return, to find the truth when they were ready. "We must protect this place," Aaron said quietly. "This is not only history. It is a part of who we are." The others nodded. They knew the world above would be eager to hear of this discovery. But they also knew it must be shared with care. Some might see only mystery, others only treasure. Few would understand the true meaning. The chamber grew quiet again, but the glow of the crystal remained, steady and calm. Aaron looked around the smooth walls and felt certain the story was not over. This hidden place was only one piece of a larger mystery. And the desert above still held secrets waiting to rise from the sand. The glow of the crystal faded until it became only a soft pulse of light, steady and calm. The chamber grew quiet again, as though the visions had withdrawn back into the stone. Aaron lowered his hand and stepped back, his heart still racing. He felt as though he had touched not only a crystal but a piece of memory itself. The others stood in silence. Their notebooks hung at their sides, forgotten. No words seemed strong enough to describe what they had seen. They had looked at lives once lived, at moments of kindness and teaching that had shaped the very roots of humanity. At last, one member of the team spoke in a soft voice. "Why was it hidden? Why was it left beneath the sand for so long?" Aaron shook his head. "Perhaps they wanted us to find it only when we were ready. Perhaps they trusted that one day we would seek truth, not power." The group climbed back up into the great chamber of skeletons. The lantern light flickered gently across the circle. The still figures seemed even more solemn now, as if they were guardians of what the team had just seen. Aaron walked slowly among them, looking at each one. Their silent faces held no expression, yet their presence filled the room with quiet dignity. "They stayed here until their last breath," Aaron whispered. "They chose to remain." The thought made the chamber heavier. These beings had once walked the earth, shared knowledge, and then allowed themselves to fade away. Not because they were forgotten, but because their purpose was complete. The skeletons were not a sign of defeat. They were a sign of devotion, a reminder that the visitors had chosen to tie their story with the story of humans. The team sat together near the center of the chamber. They spoke in low voices, sharing their thoughts. Some worried about how the world would react to such a discovery. Some feared that people might laugh or dismiss it as false. Others feared that those in power might try to use it for their own gain. Aaron listened to all of them, then said, "The truth is greater than fear. If we hide it, the silence will remain forever. If we share it, the silence will end, and people will know they were never alone." The chamber seemed to echo his words, though no sound followed. They continued to study the carvings and the orbs, but nothing more stirred. The visions had ended, leaving behind only memory. The skeletons sat as they always had, patient and still. The orbs glowed faintly but no longer released new images. It was as if the chamber had shown all it was willing to reveal. Aaron sat quietly, gazing at the circle. He wondered about the final moments of these beings. Did they gather here knowing their time was ending? Did they speak to one another through the glowing orbs until the last breath? Did they feel sorrow, or peace, or pride in what they had given? The thought filled him with both sadness and respect. He felt a deep connection to them, as though they were not strangers from far away but teachers who had chosen to plant their wisdom in human soil. Hours passed, yet the team did not wish to leave. They felt as though leaving too soon would be unkind. The chamber had waited for ages, and now it had shared its story. They owed it their patience in return. At last, Aaron stood. "We will return to the surface," he said. "But we must come back. This place is not finished with us." The others nodded, though their steps were slow. They looked back often as they climbed through the passage and out into the desert air. The sun was setting, painting the sky with gold and red. The wind carried the sand gently across the ground, as if the desert itself wished to close the doorway again. Aaron paused at the entrance, staring back into the shadowed passage. He felt the silence pressing from within, a silence filled not with emptiness but with memory. The skeletons, the crystal, the orbs, all of them had spoken without words, and now they rested once more. He whispered softly, "We will not forget." The desert swallowed his voice, yet he felt as though the chamber had heard him. That night, the team gathered around a small fire near their tents. They spoke of what they had seen, each detail recorded with care. Yet the mood was thoughtful, almost heavy. They understood that they carried a secret too vast to keep forever. Aaron looked up at the stars. They glimmered across the sky, endless and bright, just as they had in the glowing visions on the chamber walls. Somewhere out there, the visitors had once begun their journey. Somewhere out there, perhaps others still looked toward Earth. The silence of the desert wrapped around them, deep and endless. But for Aaron, it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of waiting, a silence that carried meaning. And he knew that sharing the truth would soon become their greatest test. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and pink. Aaron stood at the edge of the excavation site, looking back at the pyramid. Its stones gleamed faintly in the early light, hiding the wonders that lay within. The chamber of skeletons, the crystal, and the glowing orbs were now a memory that would never leave him. The team was packing equipment, careful not to disturb the site. Each person moved with reverence, understanding that they had discovered something far beyond ordinary history. They were not just archaeologists, they were witnesses to a story older than anyone had imagined. Aaron felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. The pyramid had shared its secrets, but it had also given a gift, the chance to remember the connection between humans and visitors from the stars. He thought of the skeletons, seated patiently in their circle, still holding the glowing orbs. They had waited for someone to come and understand. "Do you think the world will believe it?" one team member asked, breaking the quiet. Aaron smiled faintly. "Some will, some will not. But belief is not what matters. The truth is still here, waiting for those who seek it." They prepared to leave, marking the entrances and taking careful notes of every detail. The pyramid had to remain protected. Its message was not only for them, it was for all who were ready to understand the history of human learning and the kindness of the visitors who had come to Earth. As they walked across the sand, Aaron looked back once more. He could almost see the glow of the orbs through the stones, as if the chamber itself was saying goodbye. He remembered the visions of the visitors teaching humans, showing them how to live with knowledge and care. He felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet pride in being part of this story. The team returned to their camp. They shared their findings carefully, recording everything in detail, but also discussed how to protect the site. They knew that some people might seek to take the orbs or disturb the skeletons. The pyramid was a treasure, not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge and history. That night, as the desert wind whispered across the dunes, Aaron lay under the stars. He thought of the glowing maps, the crystal, and the circle of skeletons. The visitors had left behind more than tools and visions, they had left lessons. Patience, respect, learning, and the understanding that progress comes from connection, not conflict. He realized that humanity had been part of something greater from the very beginning. The pyramid chamber was proof that humans were never truly alone. Even in the past, there were those who looked to the stars, guided by beings wiser and gentler than anyone could imagine. In the following days, the team published their findings carefully. They shared sketches, notes, and photographs of the carvings and the pyramid's exterior. People were amazed, some skeptical, some inspired. Discussions began about humanity's past, about the possibility that knowledge had arrived from distant visitors long ago. Aaron listened to the reactions and smiled quietly. It did not matter if everyone believed. The truth was already spoken in the chamber, and the skeletons, the crystal, and the orbs had done their work. They had connected humans to the past, and in a small but powerful way, connected humans to the stars. As the desert sun climbed higher, Aaron returned to the edge of the pyramid one last time. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sand and stone. He thought of the visitors and of the circle of skeletons who had waited so long. The pyramid had stood through centuries of silence, and now its story had reached the world. Aaron felt hope. Humanity's journey was only beginning, and the chamber had reminded him that wisdom, kindness, and curiosity were timeless. The visitors had shared their gifts and waited patiently for someone to recognize them. Now, humans could continue that story, learning and growing, inspired by the memory of those who had once walked among them. He turned to leave, looking back one last time. The pyramid stood calm, mysterious, and eternal. Its chamber remained hidden beneath the stones, filled with the quiet guardians of knowledge. The desert wind moved over the sands, carrying the memory across the earth. Aaron whispered softly to himself, "The story continues, and we are a part of it." The team walked away, leaving footprints in the sand that the wind would soon erase. Yet the pyramid remained, as it always had, waiting for the next seeker of truth. The chamber of skeletons had shared its secrets, and in doing so, had shown that humanity's place in the universe was more remarkable than anyone had ever imagined. In the quiet of the desert, under the endless sky, the mysteries were unearthed, and the story of connection, learning, and hope would live forever.